Great lawyers don't always know how to build great law firms. Let's change that. Join Ben Gideon as he shares hard-won lessons from building his own financially successful law firm and practical insights from top law firm entrepreneurs, business consultants, and more. This is a podcast for lawyers, by lawyers. Welcome to Elawvate. Build and grow your law firm. Produced and powered by Law Pods.
Hello and welcome to Elawvate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm. I'm Jeff Wright, Chief Operating Officer at Gideon Asen, joined by our host, partner, attorney extraordinaire, Ben Gideon. Morning, Ben.
These introductions are getting more elaborate every time, Jeff.
There's so much I want to say about you, and I don't know what's going to come out.
Well, I'm glad we're limiting that then.
Yeah, we'll limit it. It's really good to see you. We're coming off a very well-received episode. Our last episode was attorney compensation, and we heard from a lot of our listeners about the episode and how appreciative they were of your openness, Ben, and the firm's openness to, share our compensation plan and everything. So I just wanted to thank our listeners for reaching out and engaging with us.
Yeah, it was cool to hear from so many people, and folks took us up on the offer to share our compensation plan and spreadsheet documents and everything. And for everyone who's asked, we have shared. If anyone has not asked but would like that information, just reach out and we'll send it over.
Let's talk about our sponsors. I can kick that off. Our Build and Grow podcast is brought to you by 1% for the Planet. 1% for the Planet is something our firm has been involved in for a long time. It's a absolutely fantastic nonprofit that distributes your money to pre-vetted environmental nonprofits throughout the country and throughout the world. Firms and businesses simply pledge 1% of revenue, and your giving is done, and you have access to their website to identify certain nonprofits that you may want to give to make sure they are qualified. And it's a fantastic partnership we have. If anyone does join 1% for the Planet, please reach out to Ben and I, and we'll be sure to give you a shout out on the show.
Yeah, I've been thinking with the wildfires burning the world away, maybe we need to increase it to 2%. But
yeah, it's crazy out west. I'm heading to Utah in about a month, and I hope it's still there.
yeah, I mean, it's going on. There's actually a Google application you can get on and look at all the world wildfires going on right now, but it's crazy how many different locations are burning.
Yeah.
Canada being the worst for a while. But my daughter was over in France and Spain, and there are huge wildfires over there, as people probably know. And my wife and I just came back from Scotland. There were wildfires there. We were about 45 minutes from the location of a major wildfire, which I didn't really understand because it rained every single day we were there. So our podcast today is also sponsored by Supio. Supio is a AI platform designed specifically for trial lawyers, extremely well engineered and designed, used by a lot of top trial lawyers all over the country. Their reaction to the platform has been wildly positive. So if anybody needs an AI platform to help you do things like demand letters or organize medical records, request medical records, create timelines, and there's a whole series of things it can do extremely well. So check it out at supio.com.
We had Jerry, the CEO and one of the co-founders, on this podcast a number of months ago. So if you want to go back in the annals, you can watch that podcast and learn more about Supio. And last and certainly not least, this podcast is brought to you by Vision Spark. Vision Spark is an executive key team member search firm, meaning they'll find chief operating officers, chief financial officers, heads of HR, CIOs. If you've listened to this podcast, we've talked a lot about culture, a lot about hiring, and how important it is for us. And, one of our tenets is there's no better investment than bringing in the right people, and Vision Spark can certainly help you do that. So reach out to them, have a conversation. We think you'll like them. We use them to this day with the hiring process, especially for our attorneys, and it's a fantastic partnership. All right. So today we're transitioning to intakes and evaluations. I think the reason why this is important, when Ben and Taylor were writing our 4-year strategic plan, our biggest KPI and the biggest thing that we track is qualified cases. So, meaning we have pretty stringent intake criteria for our litigation team in terms of what we will take for personal injury, what we will take for medical malpractice. And really, the only way to hit that KPI and get the number of qualified cases we need to hit our revenue goals is to scale intakes, but also free up our litigation team to handle the influx of new cases. And building out an appropriate intake and evaluation department was one of the first key tenets in the strategic plan. So, Ben, I don't know if you want to kind of give the genesis of your thoughts there when you were writing the plan.
Yeah, that was well said, Jeff. I mean, I want to be mindful of the idea that not everybody listening has a plaintiff's, trial firm and does personal injury, medical malpractice, the kind of work we do. But I do think for any law firm, the idea of contact with new potential clients and people that are reaching out with inquiries about possible cases or business that they want to bring your way, that's critical to every firm, because obviously all of us as attorneys depend on having enough high quality work, enough cases or clients to meet our goals. So in whatever business you're in, you need to have a system for triaging and intaking new business, new clients into the practice. And that's really what we're talking about with this department. It's pretty individualized to the kind of cases we do and would have to be tweaked for different types of practices, but I think a lot of the concepts are pretty universal and apply to any type of law practice. And so a couple things you mentioned about it. One is the critical aspect of having functionality of your firm to be able to accomplish that in terms of allowing you to scale. Because if you need a steady diet of new cases, new clients, and there's a process of vetting that, triaging it, sifting through inquiries to determine which of those could be viable clients or cases and which are not, you have to have a system for that that can itself be extremely burdensome and can inhibit your ability to scale, because you get to a point where if you have enough inquiries, you just can't handle them, or you're missing cases, you're not providing good customer service to people that are contacting your office, and so people are going elsewhere, potentially leaving bad reviews or having bad experiences. So striking that right balance where you can accommodate all of the inquiries and carefully vet them, give people respectful, communication and interaction, and then make sure you're not missing critical assets and key opportunities for your firm is really important. And it really maps into the plan to scale and market, because if you generate too many inquiries, too many new potential cases or clients, but don't have the capability to handle that on the front end, then your marketing dollars are being wasted. You're squandering opportunities. You're creating bad will. So those two things kind of have to grow in scale, in lockstep at the same time. You can't have more business than you can handle, but as you build your business, you need to have enough business to sustain it. So it just really needs to be a balance there. And that's what we've really attempted to achieve with this department of the firm you're discussing now.
Yeah, and I think it's something the firm has grown into, and depending on what stage your firm is at, whether you're, just at the startup stage going out on your own or you're looking to scale. When Ben and Taylor started the firm, and a lot of this is repetitive from what we've talked about before, they brought a small number of cases over with them. And then Taylor really started hitting the phones. And I don't want to say the firm was living off of existing cases and referrals, but that was your bread and butter. But because it was you, Taylor, and a paralegal, you two were doing all the intakes. As more business came in and you and Taylor had to spend more time on the casework, you brought in an intake coordinator and additional staff, additional attorneys, but that intake coordinator was your front line. But if they could not decline the case or move it to another firm as a referral, the litigation team, including you and Taylor, were still tied up doing intakes with these. So the next logical migration is what we did, where that was not sustainable to growth, is we developed what we call the IECU, intake evaluation and core case unit. I have no idea how we came up with that name. I think Ben came up with it. I called it ICU, I think, for my first 3 weeks here, and was corrected a number of times. And the premise behind that was we obviously still have an intake coordinator, but we brought on a non-litigation attorney as well as another paralegal, where they would handle the intakes. They would do the preliminary case reviews. They would do the preliminary scrub, for lack of a better term. And if they felt that this could possibly be a qualified case, at that point, they would bring in the litigation department. So did I kind of hit all the steps on the maturation of that?
Yeah, I think you described that accurately. I think it's important to step back the reference you have to qualified cases. I'm not sure we've explained that before, but every business should have one or only a couple, but ideally one key performance indicator, KPI, that is kind of the most important indicator of the health of the business. And the exercise of trying to figure out what that is for your individual business is a really critical exercise to go through, because it gives you a lot of insight into what drives the success of your individual business. So, I mean, if you were selling widgets, it might be, sales per month, or if you had a subscription-based business, it might be numbers of current subscribers or new subscribers enlisted in the last 30 days. But whatever your business is, if you have an hourly rate firm, it might be hours billed per month, or the hours per attorney, or something like that, or the hourly rate, or some. So you just really need to drill down on that. For a plaintiff's trial practice, it's a challenging thing to come up with, because there are lots of different candidates for what it could be, such as gross revenue, or total fee receipts, or fee generated per lawyer. But the problem is, our type of business tends to vacillate greatly between periods of lulls where there are no case settlements or fees generated, and then huge case settlements where we get a huge influx of fee money and revenue. And so basing it on any kind of an average, and when things are dependent on success of an individual case, makes it very difficult. So we came up with this concept of qualified cases for our key performance indicator, which, what a qualified case is a case that meets our criteria. And we have very stringent criteria for cases we will take into our litigation teams to litigate and try. And the idea of our firm health is that we can measure our firm's health by the number of qualified cases in our practice, because we know we're very good at case selection. And we know that over time, if we have sufficient quantity of qualified cases, that's going to generate the revenue we need for the health of the firm. And as those qualified case numbers grow, we know that our future revenue is going to grow. And we don't have to drill down into individual case. This individual case might not be successful. This other one might be more successful than we expected. But if you look at qualified cases across the board, it's a very good metric for our firm health. Sorry for that long-winded explanation of that, but it's important because when you're thinking about why are you building a engine to generate more business or more of whatever it is you're looking for, you need to know what you're looking for and what is a measure of the health and success of the firm. So, for example, in our case, it's not the number of cases. There's a lot of cases we could take and we don't want. They're cases, but they're not qualified cases. And a non-qualified case is not a measure of the health of our practice. So once we determined that that's what we needed to build out a system to generate more qualified cases. But in order to do that, a big part of that is the vetting and filtering process on the front end. And so now we know what the goal of the process is. One of the key values in our firm, at really any firm that wants to be financially successful, is to try to limit the amount of attorney time necessary to accomplish goals that don't require attorney involvement. And so, as you alluded to, there was a time, and actually for years, where every new client basically, came into the office and Taylor or I would just talk to them directly and have a conversation about their case. And, 9 out of 10 of those we would decline. And that took a lot of time. And that was a lot of attorney time devoted to something that didn't have any economic value in the end of the day. So one of the insights is to reduce the amount of time attorneys have to spend doing that work. And we can, discuss that from there.
It was a pleasant surprise coming from the banking world for 2 decades. Every strategic planning meeting I was part of, the leading key performance indicator was always revenue. And coming here and not seeing that as the leading key performance indicator was actually invigorating, because I almost think a revenue number is a cop-out, where you need to drill down to something like we did, because revenue is going to be a product of our key performance indicator, qualified cases. And just coming up with an arbitrary number and saying, we want to do 5 million this year, we want to do 10 million, whatever your number happens to be, give it more thought. Don't just arbitrarily throw a random number out there. Drill down into something like Ben and Taylor did, put some thought into it. I think it's going to be beneficial for you. There were kind of 4 main goals of our intake and evaluation department, and I'll go through the 4 goals, in my mind, and how we're doing with each one. So the first was free the litigation team. We want our litigation attorneys, who I'm sure every firm is like this, they are arguably your most valuable, your most highly compensated employees. You want them working on your most valuable, complex cases and important cases. So number 1 was free the litigation team. Number 2 was identify qualified cases quickly, and we call them diamonds in the rough or whatever they are, but to train the intake team, train the attorney and the paralegal to identify what has the parameters within it to possibly be a qualified case, and get them in the hands of a litigation attorney. Number 3 was a lot of cases. I mean, we probably turned down 98% of the cases for a variety of reasons, but there are cases that meet the criteria of a number of other firms that we have good relationships with. So we have the ability to refer those cases out, which derives a source of revenue for the firm that wasn't there before. And the last thing was certain cases that do not meet our qualified case standards. If we feel there is clear negligence and we feel that case can ideally settle pre-suit, we will keep that on the books and have our IECU attorney and paralegal work that case without the involvement of the lit team, and another revenue generator there. So I'll kind of pause and, get Ben's thoughts on those 4 goals or 4 areas.
One thing we tried to really keep in mind and remain focused on was not to mix up goals. So they're high volume advertising firms where their goal is to take in the maximum number of viable cases and to move them through the pipeline and to convert them into cash. That is not the goal of our IECU. Our sole goal, our principal goal, is to generate qualified cases for the practice. That's where we make our bread and butter. That's our core business model. It's the highest value added, most lucrative work that we get and that we have, and that's what we really want to remain focused on. That doesn't mean that there can't be some ancillary benefits of building this out, which you've just identified. And so the goal is everything is centered around making sure we don't miss and that we properly discuss, vet the cases, identify the qualified cases, and move them into our practice. So if we were only to accomplish that goal and nothing else, that would be successful for what we're trying to do. However, what we recognized is that in doing that, we will identify some cases, like you mentioned, that are not qualified cases, but that we have the capacity, as long as we build out that capacity, which we have, to monetize those cases, to provide a service to those clients because we were skilled at doing that, and that there's a particular category of case that doesn't require litigation in order to move it quickly to resolution, and that brings value to the firm and to those clients. So that's kind of a spillover effect, but we're capturing that, the economic value of that, and then the other economic value we can capture are those category of cases that are not qualified cases that we don't think would be economical to handle within our own firm because they might need to be sued. There might need to be more elbow grease put into that to monetize them than what we're building or have resources to do. And those can get referred out to other law firms. And so, in concept, our IECU department should be, in some sense, self-funding, in that we should be able to pay for the costs of that entire unit of our firm and all of the marketing that we're doing to attract additional work and cases through those kind of ancillary revenue streams that come out of that IECU. So, and our goal is that would be the case, so that it's sort of revenue neutral in the sense of we're building a machine to generate qualified cases, and it's paying for itself.
Yep.
And we would consider that to be a success. Now, the reality is it could do more than that. I mean, it could become an additional profit center for the firm that could go beyond paying for itself and generate real additional meaningful revenue. It hasn't achieved that yet, but I think there's real opportunity that it could. But again, it goes back to just being really clear. And I think it's been very important for us to be really clear about what our purpose in doing it is, because if we weren't, we might continue to hold on to cases in the IECU that we shouldn't have because they're too expensive and time consuming to litigate. That would sap additional resources from that. That would take away the time that our lawyer in the IECU has to help us carefully vet and evaluate cases to identify more qualified cases, right?
Need help on a complex personal injury or medical malpractice case? Gideon Asen accepts case referrals and regularly co-counsels with lawyers nationwide on high-value claims. The firm has recovered millions of dollars in cases that competitors turned away because they dig deeper. Ready to learn more? Email bgideon@gideonasenlaw.com to start the conversation. Gideon Asen shares fees as permitted by the laws of each state. Don't let complex cases overwhelm your practice. Elevate justice together with Gideon Asen.
Everything comes back to qualified cases. Creating the IECU, number one, if it became a distraction, was going to be a problem. Number two, if it took up too much litigation team time, it was going to be a problem, because those were running contrary to why we were establishing the unit. But let's talk about it. So, our unit is still in its infancy. We hired our IECU attorney last May, so 15 months ago. A month later, we hired the paralegal for it. So 14 months ago, the IECU was created. We did a very soft rollout where, we provided training. We came up with our internal processes and procedures. So for all intents and purposes, we've probably been up and running for roughly 1 year. The biggest thing it has allowed us to do is scale. And we're very lucky to have an extraordinary intake coordinator. But when we started the IECU a year ago, we were averaging between 25 and 30 intakes a week. By establishing this unit, by establishing our processes and procedures that we've constantly tweaked along the way, we're averaging between 50 and 60 intakes now a week. So we've doubled our capacity to take the intakes. And at the end of the day, with our stringent qualified case criteria, it sounds callous, but it really is a numbers game. And you have to sift through a lot of cases to find those qualified cases. And the only way to hit that KPI was to increase our numbers. And we've done that. I mean, just last week, we had 72 intakes in 1 week, setting a new record. And we're still trying to find a way to continue to scale with obviously without burning out the staff and the intake team, and keeping the service levels high.
Yeah, you mentioned this, but for a long time, both in my former firm and then when we started this firm, the worry about doing more direct to consumer marketing is that that's really a different kind of business than the high end trial practice that we have. And the risk is that you become distracted from what you're really good at and what has been a proven successful model to do something that you're not good at, competing with people that are good at doing that other thing, which is really more of a kind of business of law than a practice of law. And so our core principles in building out the marketing and the IECU was that we wanted to create an absolute firewall between that unit and their work and our litigation practice. We didn't want any of our trial lawyers who are working on cases that have, 7 and 8 figure value and that we depend upon for our success and our revenue, frankly, that the clients are counting on for those results. We did not want them distracted, even in the slightest, by this other effort that's going on to generate the cases. And interestingly, when we ended up building out this separate unit, and our firm had grown too large for our current office suite, which is on the top floor, 4th floor of our building, there was no more space there. And so we were forced to lease another office suite down on the 1st floor of the same building. And so not only do we have a conceptual firewall between the two parts of our business, there's literally a 3-floor separation between our IEC unit, which is down on floor 1, and the rest of our litigation teams, which are up on floor 4. And so we now talk about, that case is going up to litigation, or we're going to send that down or up. And there'll come a time when our firm we're going to, get new space and we'll all be together in one floor or one area. But I think that verbiage will continue because it's become ingrained. And it's also just the optics of that, or the physical separation, has been useful actually in reinforcing the concept that these two parts of our business need to be firewalled off from one another. And so, I have been involved in helping to supervise and build the IECU along with you Taylor is now kind of handed that off to him, and he's doing some of that, but none of our other litigation attorneys are involved in that at all. I mean, other than if there's a qualified case or a potential qualified case that they need to weigh in on, or, it goes up to the fourth floor for their involvement or evaluation. But the day-to-day handling the phone calls, doing the intakes, speaking to new clients, even doing that initial evaluation of potential cases before we've determined is this a qualified case or not, our trial teams don't have to be involved in that at all. And we make a very conscious effort to avoid any cross-pollination of that. And we don't want people to be distracted. And that's really worked. And not only has it eliminated the distraction of what could be, a distraction to your core business, but as you indicated, it's freed up our trial teams to have more time to devote to their cases, because in the old days, when there wasn't that separate department of our firm, they did have to be involved in those decisions. They did have to speak to new potential clients. They did have to get involved in early evaluation of cases to determine if this was a go or not a go. And now all of the time they would have spent doing that, they can devote to working on their important work, their important cases. So it's been really beneficial in multiple ways.
I don't want to say it's been hard to put very definitive KPIs on our IECU unit, but the biggest challenge for me, we can't measure, freeing up hundreds of hours, literally hundreds of hours of litigation attorneys' time. I don't know how to put a dollar figure on that. It's very easy to measure, cases that the IECU has settled. I mean, we have definitive numbers there, and the qualified cases that this unit has generated from our direct-to-consumer marketing and that we've identified and we've sent upstairs, those cases aren't going to monetize for a number of years. So it's a little hard to put very definitive KPIs on the unit, but we know it's working, and it's working well, because everything we expect this unit to do, it's doing at this time. It doesn't mean we haven't had challenges. We have, and we can talk about some of those. I mean, first of all, finding an attorney, because an intake attorney is a grind. And I mean, their job is, we have a pre-vetting system that, myself, our intake coordinator, and other people in operations, when we're talking to prospective clients, we're very conscious of our intake attorneys' schedule and calendar and time, just like we are a litigation attorney. So we do everything in our power to only pass along cases that we think have some viability. If we're able to decline the case or refer them somewhere else, or give them some resources, we do that, but we want to be very cognizant of their time. But all day, their intake attorney is either on intake calls, answering a plethora of questions from the intake team on, an SOL or a pre-diagnosed or something, that makes it not a case, and they're helping us rule them out or rule them in. But then they're also working the cases they've kept on the books and working demand letters and speaking with insurance companies, so forth and so on. So finding the right person, I don't want to say it's been challenging, but it takes the right individual for that job. It's certainly not a job Ben would want.
It's not a job that I would want. I've done that job in part of my rest of my work, because for years, like I said, I talked to every new client, or either Taylor or I talked to everybody, and I actually enjoy talking to people, and you can learn a lot about this business by having those reps of talking to so many people and seeing those common fact patterns, and it helps you get a better sense for what is and isn't the case. But you're right, there comes a point where that's not economically viable, and finding somebody. So just back up. I mean, why do you need a lawyer in that role? I think there's a lot of firms, volume firms, where they have kind of case manager types, glorified paralegals or former insurance adjusters who will do a lot of that initial screening, which I do think is a viable way to structure it. But ultimately, in whatever department you're going to call that, there needs to be a lawyer somewhere, because as lawyers, we cannot make final decisions that involve legal decision making without having a lawyer somewhere in the chain. So, like you said, there could be questions of a statute of limitations, or whether there's a viable legal claim, or even just in a med mal case, doing the analysis of the medicine for standard of care and causation issues. At some point in the chain, especially if you're going to do more complex stuff like medical malpractice, you need to have a lawyer's involvement. And so that can only come from two places. It can come from taking the time of the lawyers that are skilled at those cases and litigating them actively, or you can have a different lawyer who's not also doing that job. And like you said, finding a lawyer, so, and the skill set required for the lawyer who's doing the intake and evaluation role is pretty broad. There's a lot of things you need to be able to be good at. I mean, for one, you have to be able to talk to people on the phone and instill confidence, because when someone's calling and they're looking for a lawyer and they don't feel confident in the person they're talking to on the other end of the phone, and it's a significant case, there's a chance you're going to lose the case if they don't make that connection and make it quickly, and make it in a way that gives the client confidence that you can help them with whatever their issue is. And so, there are a lot of people that just don't have the skill set to communicate that sort of level of confidence when they're talking to somebody. Number one. Number two, you have to be able to quickly process information so that you can segregate what is a case from what isn't a case quickly, and in most instances make that decision during that one initial phone call, because you don't really have time, given the volume of those cases, to spend extra time, do research, go back and talk to somebody a second time. If you don't make the decision in phone call one, you've just doubled the time that it requires to deal with this individual person. And if it's not a case, that's not a good use of time, right? So there's that skill set. You need to have the ability then to, in the cases that you are taking in to evaluate, to do a evaluation of what could be a fairly complex set of facts, in medical cases, complex medicine, and to at least come to a of fairly, well-informed conclusion about whether this is a viable case or it's not a viable case. And that requires a fair amount of intellectual processing power. Some of our core values, curiosity about the work, somebody who's willing to, not follow conventional wisdom, but, search for answers. And then that same lawyer is also in our model charged with working up and settling those category of cases that we keep in our IECU for processing through to conclusion. And that's yet a different skill set. You have to have the ability to get on the phone with insurance adjusters, to talk to clients, to negotiate settlements, to work out liens. So there's a whole series of things. So, and maybe most important, you have to have someone who has all of those skills and is willing and is capable of doing that wide variety of things, but also is willing not to be suing cases, who doesn't want to go to court, who's not likely to be defending depositions. And so getting somebody who has, the a certain amount of interpersonal skills, relational skills, communication skills, but also doesn't have potentially the ambition to be a trial lawyer, to be in court or trying cases, it's challenging to find somebody who checks all those boxes. So, step one is knowing exactly what you're looking for. And we have a sense for what we're looking for and what the skill set is that would be required to do that job well. I feel like right now that the person we have in that role does check all of those boxes. And, frankly, the final thing is somebody who's willing to do that day in and day out, despite the tediousness and the challenging nature of that work, because talking to people regularly, having to decline their case, that's not always pleasant. You're listening to a lot of very difficult stories from people who've all been through a lot, and that can take a toll. on you over time. Doing all that without kind of having the glory of the big win in the courtroom or the big settlement in the high value case. It can be a lot to ask of any individual. So
Yeah, I think another thing, and this is probably an entire show at some point in the future, one other thing that has allowed us to scale and I think has allowed our attorney and our intakes team's learning curve to be shortened is our adoption of technology and AI in certain areas. When we talk about case workup, it takes med mal attorneys years and years and years to become proficient in their craft. And most of the attorneys you're going to find to, you know, be an intake type attorney, a pre litigation attorney, is most likely not going to have a substantial med mal background. It's just they're more litigators than anything else. And, the adoption of AI beyond, chat and Claude and everything, finding a good third party system that can do the med mal review, organize, give you chronologies. You can have a good back and forth with it, has really shortened that learning curve. The other thing from a technology standpoint is, during this building out of the IECU, we realized our current phone system was not cutting it. So we did a phone system integration with a new company that is AI focused, gives us AI transcripts. And recently, our overflow or our third party after hours coverage again was not cutting it. And we've migrated to an AI generated system that we actually launched 2 days ago. And, to better streamline that process. So, I mean, Ben, you can obviously, speak more about how AI and doing a good case review before we send something up to the litigation team, again, to be conscious of their time, how important that is and how it's working.
yeah, you're right. It's probably a whole show on some of the AI applications that we use, but just to emphasize what you just said, it really has accelerated the learning curve so that somebody who would have had an extremely difficult time getting up to speed on med mal cases, just identifying what the key issues in the case are, the decision points for accepting a case or rejecting the case. AI helps you do that much more quickly because it can take a complex set of facts and kind of distill it down to some of the core ideas or questions that are going to be definitive for the case. I think for our intake attorney, if before a phone call there's a description of the case and she's able to plug that in, she can get a good sense for what some of the issues may be and what some of the key questions are that she needs to ask the client about that can help make the decision about whether it's a case we take or we don't take. I should say we don't use AI to evaluate cases or to substitute for the human judgment of it. It's much easier to identify rule out criteria than 100% rule in criteria. But a lot of the job of the IECU attorney is rule out, because if it's a clear rule out, that's easy. That case, we don't have to do any more work. It doesn't generate any more attorney time or involvement for the firm. It's just a polite rejection. And AI can help with that. Once you get to the part of, okay, this seems like a viable case, the AI can help do an initial sort of high level overview and analysis. And then that's when the attorney needs to get in and start to go down to the specific strands of the case in detail. And that can be done to some extent with AI assisting, but it's also a cross-referencing specific records, particular information, articles, literature, whatever the case may be for the particular case. But the bottom line is it's extremely valuable and can take what would have been years to get to up to speed, to ask the right questions to identify the key issues. It can change that from years to months in terms of the learning curve. It can assist in developing rule out criteria very well and expedite the process of filtering out cases we don't want, and you know, can assist in the more substantive evaluation of the cases as well. So there's just many ways that in some sense allows this model to work, because probably there was a day recently where you couldn't bring in somebody who wasn't a skilled and experienced medical malpractice lawyer and have them involved in vetting and triaging med mal cases on the front end. I do think with the supplement of AI and supervision from lawyers, more senior lawyers, which we do in our practice, that's completely viable today. I wanted to comment on one other thing you mentioned, which is I think it's important for our listeners to understand that the way our IECU works is really a full team approach. So, I mean, we mentioned the intake coordinator, we have the IECU attorney, we have an IECU paralegal, but we also have Jeff, our chief operating officer, who, I mean, you are regularly involved in the intake side of the business. People regularly come to you with questions. You will actually take client calls. If they're difficult clients, you will sometimes offer to take that off somebody's hands. You're picking up overflow calls. Our finance director, Christine, at one point was our intake coordinator. She knows all of these issues intimately. She's always willing and available, and often does, participate or assist in overflow if somebody's not in the office, or if there's questions when she's around that she can address. So she's involved in it. Our business administrative assistant, who also works on the first floor, will take overflow calls. She's trained on how to handle this. So it's really a team effort. And one of the things that I've been so impressed in your management of this is just how you have built out the entire team in a way that they all see themselves as part of it and are always willing to step in and support each other, so that, even if we're getting 72 new case inquiries a week, which we did last week, we have capacity to handle it all. And the one other thing I would want to say about that is that you guys have also done an amazing job at continually refining the process. And Christine is heavily involved in that as well. But because what you realize as you start to get up into the volume and the scaling is that little things add up to big things. And if you can take what's a standard intake call that used to take 30 minutes with a new client and reduce that down to 10 minutes or even 5 minutes, that's that's like hiring, 2 or 3 new intake coordinators, because you're so much more efficient. And we have done that by not only creating other ways that clients contact us and can get us critical information without human involvement, but also streamlining the way in which we interface with our digital systems, so that things are automatically imported in, or even if people have to type things into the system, it's all expedited and streamlined to shortcut and shorten that process. And you guys have really just, to a very fine degree, engineered all of that and continue to refine and engineer it. And do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head, and kind of what, I had said before, that just setting a revenue goal or a revenue KPI is a cop out. The cop out for scaling is all just hire 2 more people. I don't want to say it's very easy to hire a couple more people, but to find another intake person that's going to do it correctly and pay them and train them and give them benefits, and then you scale a little more and you have to do and bring in a third intake person. There's ways to create efficiencies without having to increase your FTEs and increasing your expenses. To Ben's point, it's an entire team effort. I mean, it's a small group of us, but we work on everything together and we test everything together, and automation is key. We have web forms and we have, chat inquiries and web forms that come in. And now we have the after hours AI summaries that come in, and we've worked, with all the third parties to create APIs so they're automatically going into our CRM system. That really cuts down on the manual data entry. Christine then created an AI rewrite within our CRM system that organizes it in a way where it filters and everything pops into the correct boxes. So what we were manually boarding a year ago, someone would call in, we would get an email with the information. We were then manually typing that into our case management system. And then at times we weren't getting good information. We had to physically go listen to the phone call, log into a third party system. You got the MP3 of the phone call, sit and listen to a 19-minute phone call and fill in all the blanks. So you've worked on that intake for 30 minutes and you haven't even reached out to the PC yet. We've gotten rid of all of that. So it is much more refined, and really one of your biggest assets, your biggest commodities is your time. We talk about freeing the litigation team's time up. We also need to free up our intake court team's time up so that we can have good conversations with potentially qualified candidates and expedite all the ones that we do not feel are qualified. It doesn't mean we're blowing them off. We are giving them the same amount of attention that the other ones are getting. Everyone either gets a call back, or if they've, inquired electronically or say they want a text, they're getting a text, they're getting an email, they're getting a phone call, all within a certain time frame as quickly as we can turn it around. So we're not losing the human interaction by automating these things, but we're conscious of the intakes team time. The entire intake team time is very conscious of our attorney's time, and we're only giving them, if we can't rule it out and we think there's some viability there, that's all our attorney is seeing, something that we cannot rule out. If they cannot rule it out, that is the only time the litigation team is getting involved. So, and we stick to that criteria pretty well, and it's allowed us to scale to this point. And I'm glad Ben mentioned that, because none of this would be possible without it being an entire team effort.
Yeah, well, that's probably a great spot to end on. I mean, I think one of the hanging loose ends is our new AI after hours call service, which I know you spent a lot of time developing the algorithm, refining, improving. We, numerous test calls and continuing to refine it to a point where we're comfortable rolling it out, but it's still new. So maybe that's something we can report back on in, a few months and see how that's going. I mean, the reality is this is almost certainly where we will be heading. The time frame where you're going to have, live humans answering the majority of phone calls is probably behind us. There'll come a point where the AI can do that as well or better than the live human, or at least be a screening mechanism to identify people that need to speak to a human versus those that, your business doesn't gain any value in having that done. But all of that's still in flux and remains to be seen how it works.
Yeah, we'll certainly report back. Like I said earlier, it's been live for 2 days. I know Ben tried it out yesterday with a phone call that gave us some good laughs. So that's very
one of
helpful.
the best parts of the AI is you can mess with it and see what it does. So
yeah, we took about 8 weeks, creating the logic with the third party, and doing test calls and changing things around. And to what Ben said, we got it to a point where we think it's ready to roll out. We're monitoring it, virtually every call that it takes with overflow, and I'm sure we'll make tweaks. But yeah, we'll report back on how it's working, and then assuming it's working well, we'll probably shout out that company as well.
The point of comparison is not perfect. It's the human after hours call service that we had used before, which was simply horrendous.
Yeah.
I mean,
this is already 100 times better than the human after hours, but we want to get it to a point where it's working as well as possible, and we're not missing any qualified cases. All comes back to qualified cases. All right. Well, I appreciate
thanks, Jeff.
it, Ben.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for
See
your
you
time.
next time.
Thanks for listening to Elawvate. Build and grow your law firm. Share with colleagues if you found it valuable. Remember, building a successful law firm takes discipline, strategy, and determination. But you're not alone. Produced and powered by LawPods.